I hope you all have had a wonderful time together sharing a meal. I'm sure it was delicious and filling and good conversation. Tonight we're going to be talking about Jesus as teacher. And isn't it interesting that so often in our lives, our learning comes from around the table, from a very early age. As children, we learn around a table and we grow up around tables. And some of our best teachers have invited us to the table of their lives, have they not? And so this time of sharing our lives around a table is really integral to the task of, not task, but the invitation to learn and grow. And certainly Jesus participated in that and valued that in the ways that he gathered people around the table and around the table of not just of communion, which of course is incredibly important, but the ways that Jesus met people at the table of their lives. And so we're going to talk tonight about Jesus as teacher. Before we get into that in depth, I want to kind of back up a little bit and show kind of talk a little bit about this book as Memoir Theology. As Diana Butler Bass has shared in another video that I watched about this book, she talks about the difference between theological memoir and memoir theology. Her goal in writing this book is to not write a theological memoir, which would just be about her own story, but a memoir theology that invites all of us to embrace our own memoir theology. The reason I want to bring this up with you is I've heard some feedback from a few people, and I understand it, and in some ways can understand it in my own reading of the book, that Diana shares much of her own story. This is a memoir of her life with Jesus and the different ways that she's gone through. And that there are times in this book where we might not relate with Diana's experience of mainline Christianity or evangelical Christianity, or she goes through a very intense period of very strict Calvinistic theology that she would say took her on the wrong path. But the point is not so much whether or not we relate with her memoir. She's hoping that we will feel invited into our own memoir theology, that our memories will get jogged in a way that we can say, oh yeah, these are the kind of things I picked up when I was a child, or this is what I was taught in church, for those of us who grew up in the church, or in homes for those of us who did not, or in the world. And helping us to embrace our own story and then understand that as theology. That's the real power I think Diana brings to this, that this isn't just remembering stories, but valuing them on the level of theology. These are some of the things that she has said about that. She says we can take our own lives as a text, and from the text of our lives, move over, and in effect, we are writing our theology. And then she goes on to say that we each have a theological vocation, that all believers have a theological vocation. That it's not just those in ivory towers or the 25 great theologians throughout history that write theology, but we actually write theology with our lives. And so the first question that I pose to you all tonight is, what do you think of Diana's ideas around memoir theology? And how has her memoir invited you into your own story or not? Are there ways that this has? And if so, share some of those stories with one another. How has that happened or not happened for you? And that to go around your table of fellowship and be able to talk about that. I know for me, there have been times of disruption and upheaval in my life. The first of which that I can recall was in my own family of origin. where there was so much conflict and tension, specifically in my junior high and senior high years, and that time around our family table was not time that I looked forward to. It was a very anxious time. And I recall at that time in my life really calling out to God because I needed God. I needed God in my life. And I believe that was really a beginning of my call to ministry, to meet people where they need God most too. So that's a way I would share this sort of jogging my own memoir theology. Diana goes on in our own book that we're reading, Freeing Jesus. She talks about Jesus as rabbi in her chapter. I really liked that. In the Gospels, Diana says Jesus teaches in the temple, on a hillside, by a lake, in a field, by a campfire, at dinner table, we've talked about that, while at a wedding, in the center of the city. Jesus teaches individuals, his own disciples, crowds, his friends, and even his foes. And Diana goes on to remind us that after his baptism, Jesus went to the synagogue and began to teach there in Nazareth, and that he was run out of town. And it was at that point that Jesus became an itinerant rabbi. Now, rabbi in the scriptures is not found in the Hebrew Bible. It just came into use in Jesus' day as one who taught with spiritual authority. And we all know that's part of where Jesus ran into trouble with the, quote, spiritual authorities of that day. A rabbi was one who was crafting a new approach to Hebrew texts, traditions, and interpretations, and entering into communal conversation. And so this sense of Jesus falling into the great tradition of being a teacher that invited others to look at the Hebrew texts, the law, the prophets, and to look at those texts and propose different interpretations to them, all as a part of the conversation of the day. Not coming against. Jesus didn't see himself as coming against as much as providing an interpretation as a rabbi with spiritual authority for people to enter into in that conversation. And so a second question for your group to consider would be, are there certain teachings of Jesus that you are drawn to? And why? Are there any teachings of Jesus that have challenged your own view of yourself and the world? I know for me, I preached on the end of the Sermon on the Mount this very year. Actually, it was the Sermon on the Plain. But both of those sermons end with, do not judge, do not do this, do not do that. And so it's not as if the teachings at times are easy. They're very challenging to us. And I wonder, what are some of the teachings of Jesus that you all have found challenging in your own life? And then Diana goes on to describe Jesus as a storyteller, how the parables invite us into a place that kind of get underneath our cognitive or our life construct, down to this place where we are challenged to take a look at what is really what's really going on, what's forming our views, our values, and how can we follow the way of Jesus. And so Jesus tells stories, and we know he was a masterful storyteller, masterful parable crafter. And so just that invitation to struggle with meaning and to wonder, What is God's calling here? To see the world from an unexpected angle, to look at the hidden aspects of our own values and bring to the surface unmasked questions, and to learn how to enter into the both and mystery of our faith. So the parables really invite us into this place to shake us up, to help us get beyond our own perceptions that we can cling to. And so question 3, for Jesus as storyteller, I would ask, how do the parables get underneath some of our unexamined constructs and challenge us today? And do you have a parable that has invited you to see yourself and the world from a different perspective? Certainly, many of us have a parable that really comes to mind that has helped us. I think of Andrea Crary's sermon on the parable of the parable of the prodigal son. Some people call it the prodigal father who ran to meet that son. That was very challenging and encouraging to us here at St Barnabas. So Jesus as storyteller and the way he used story to teach, and how powerful story is as a teacher. I would end with Diana's use of a Marcus Borg quote toward the end of this chapter, where she quotes him as saying, Jesus was a teacher of a way, a path, specifically a way of transformation. Let me say that again. Jesus was a teacher of a way, a path, specifically a way of transformation. And that sense of Jesus not just being a moral teacher, but a teacher of a way, a path, an invitation into transformation. And this is why some of Jesus' teachings, many, are challenging, because Jesus is calling us to a life of transformation. I think of the class that Tony Stone provided for us on the first Sunday of Lent. And she asked us, what is a feeling that you have about this word, basically transformation? And so interesting to me, the first word that came to my mind was squeeze. And I thought, that's not really a feeling, but it gives a feeling to be squeezed. I was thinking about the squeeze of transformation. And so often in my own life, going through those times of being squeezed, that something new might emerge. And that it is uncomfortable. I think about Lent and the squeeze of winter, and certainly winter in Colorado, squeezing towards spring, or even the image of a caterpillar being squeezed in that chrysalis before new life is grown. And so entering into that time of allowing God's Spirit to squeeze me in ways that I might rather not be squeezed, but co-participate in that very real hope that we have and reality as Christians, that new life is being emerged in us. So Jesus is teacher of a way, and teacher of a way, a path, and transformation is really what Diana leaves us with and what I would leave you with tonight. Thank you.